it on your side?
I am. It says start recording. So, oh, you started recording. Okay.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this month's conversation about navigating the gaps in Africa with IBN Immigration Solutions. My name is Christo. I will be the chairperson for today. The agenda for today is we're going to have a short 2-minute chat by Hervé about SA International Network, and then Andreas, who is the CEO and managing owner of IBN Immigration Solutions, will share his views, his insights, and his wisdom with us. This meeting is being recorded for sharing purposes, so if you are mentioning anything that you don't want to have in the public domain, please don't do that. Questions will be recorded during the chat, and will be handled at the end of the presentation. Thank you. Hervé, if you want to just do a quick introduction to SA International Network and share your screen. Thanks.
All right. Thanks a lot, Christo. Good morning, all. As mentioned by Christo, I'm the Business and Project Development Manager for the South African International Network. I'll just quickly share my screen and just take you through what our service offering is. Just put my camera off for better bandwidth, and let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, it is visible now. Thanks, Hervé.
Perfect. So I'll just briefly take you through our service offering, what sectors we focus on, and also have a look at some of the organizations we partnered with in order for us to give our members a turnkey solution and support when working on projects in Africa. So SAIN is a consortium of companies working together to achieve strategic and operational objectives throughout the African continent. Our vision is to make a difference by contributing to the upliftment of our society. And this is the team that we're working with, our CEO, Vicky Barrington here. And just to take you through a little bit of our service and just brief you a little. So we help with project preparation and funding, joint ventures, to import and export, new business development by assigning the in-country agents to source out local partners and clients for our members. And we also share project information with our clients through the various seminars and industry workshops that we also organize, as well as newsletters. The sectors that we cover are renewable energy, mining, agriculture, water purification, infrastructure development. SAIN, together with our partner, assists in packaging these projects, raising capital, mergers and acquisition, import and export, market development analysis, as well as infrastructure capacity. And these are some of the partners that we work with to give our members and our clients a turnkey solution and support when working on projects across the African continent. So as previously mentioned, we assist companies to expand their footprint throughout the African continent by raising capital, looking at local partners, working on market entry strategies. We host regular Africa forums and industry-focused workshops to get a better understanding of each sector that we cover. And for more information, please feel free to contact our director, Vicky Barrington, and the phone number and the contact details is all mentioned here. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Hervé. Andreas, I usually ask guests to introduce themselves the way they would like to be introduced. I believe that is covered in your presentation. So without further ado, please share your screen and tell us what we need to know and how you can help us and our members. Thank you.
Okay, I will do that. I hope. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
All right. So the problem is I don't see myself now, but that's how it is. I just wonder how I can. Yeah. Okay. All right. So today, really, what I would spend the next maybe 15-20 minutes on is really a very brief introduction about myself and the company, and then I will touch on some similarities of in the immigration system in Africa, and then touch upon a couple of challenges and hopefully conclude with 1 or 2 suggestions as a solution. So let's start. So yeah, briefly to myself. My name is Andreas Krensel. You probably still hear it from the accent. I'm originally from Germany. I'm a lawyer and a banker. Came to South Africa about over 20 years ago and built the company. We have subsequently now branched out in a couple of other countries. I kind of specialize only in immigration and Africa coverage. So who's IBN? We are truly, and probably one of the very, very few truly African immigration companies. We have offices in South Africa, in Johannesburg and Cape Town. I personally sit in Cape Town, where the company was founded. We opened then a couple of years ago an office in Namibia, and the last years added Kenya and Mozambique. So we have a pretty good coverage, at least in Southern and Eastern Africa. We employ roughly just under 30 staff members who all are doing immigration. So I do think we're one of the rather larger companies focusing on immigration. And we're servicing large multinationals, smaller multinationals, as well as still private companies. And I do think what's important to mention that we really try to, well, as a matter of fact, we actually achieve probably world-class service standards. And we have received a couple of awards for that as well. So let me continue. I already spoke to our uniques. Basically, we cover 22 markets in Africa, and we have a high quality work of international standards. I mentioned the awards, and I think that's enough. Here's a nice picture of our team, at least most of them. Some of our branches obviously are not on the picture, but at least I think it's nice to see. And then lastly, what services do we offer? Typical corporate immigration services. So everything with short-term, long-term work visas, permanent residencies, but also entry visas. And we also help in the procurement and legalization of documents. That usually is always very important. And we not just focus on the assignees, but also on the families. All right, that's the introductory part. And now I want to come to the rough overview of the immigration landscape in Africa. There's a lot of information on the slide, but I just want to touch on a couple of points. So I think in general, I tried to give a really big overview. So I'm generalizing because obviously you can't really speak for all the countries in Africa. But I do think I do in this presentation always consider the 10 to 12 major markets. So business visa usually do not allow to work. Okay, so I know a lot of especially South African companies fly in and out due to the short lead times, and they're actually conducting activities which are usually not really allowed on business visas. So usually allowed is obviously meetings, marketing events, and receiving training. If you conduct training, it's already dicey. But I do understand that obviously if something is urgent, then sometimes the processing times for short-term work visas is quite long. So business visas usually, as I said, only business meetings. The exception is Zambia. So Zambia, you can really work even on your client side. So that's maybe interesting to know. Then the vast majority of countries do offer short-term work permit options, roughly 90 days. Usually with one local extension by another 90 days. There are some countries which do not offer short-term work visas, which is Ghana, Ivory Coast, and a couple of countries in the Northern African region. But in general, 90 days. And then obviously you don't need to have your own company there. Then I think the continent is pretty much evenly split between two immigration approaches. The one is really that you usually require an entry visa, a work permission, as well as a residence. So traditionally, Northern Africa, Western Africa has the system, but also Tanzania and Mozambique, actually. And then what you know maybe from Southern Africa and East Africa is that usually you have a work permit or work visa, which contains the right to residence. So you don't have an additional step for residence. However, in Kenya and Uganda, for instance, they add an alien ID card as a kind of residence. Nearly all countries in Africa require an in-country submission process. So that means that your application gets couriered or electronically sent to our in-country partner, and they're submitting the papers really at the authorities in country. South Africa is obviously the major exception. Angola, by the way, as well, because Angola also has a lot of missions overseas and they have the entry visa requirement. and that you need to apply at the missions. But South Africa is obviously the big one, where basically all foreigners have to apply for any long-term and temporary residences at the South African missions. But usually it has to be in country, and that's why it's important that you have good local partners. Then most African countries allow to change the status from short-term work to a long-term work permit in country. So that is one way of sometimes navigating the challenges around the processing times for long-term work permits, because you can get people, your assignees, in on a short-term work permit, and then you can change in country the status. Yeah, and then last on this one is really permanent residence and citizenship is really hard to get. Most African countries are quite protective around this. Yeah. Now I'm coming to the challenges. So then the following slides are really some major challenges, and then really one section of a potential solution. So the challenges we always hear, and we also know out of own experience, number one is probably access to reliable information. A lot of countries don't put their legislation online. It's outdated, and then parts are missing. Also, South Africa, for instance, all the practical important challenges or changes are done by directives. So not legislation, just by directives. They're not in the public domain, so that's a problem. Kenya is a positive example. So is Ghana, Nigeria, and Rwanda. So you see the old English system there. They're quite open. They publish a lot. So it's much easier to kind of find your way there. But then there's countries where you find hardly anything. And then I think the other massive problem, especially also now currently in South Africa, is that there is no real data on skilled migration. So if you look at the World Bank or at other semi-governmental organizations, they always focus on refugees and migration, but they don't really look at economic impact of skilled migration, which makes the discussion really difficult what the benefits are from skilled migration. So what happens now in South Africa, that we just talk about foreigners, not undocumented or illegal foreigners, and that makes the discussion about the positive effects of skilled migration quite difficult because there's no data. All right, then I do think that's a very important one, a huge challenge, the massive difference between legislation and the practical application of the law. I do think that's a real challenge throughout the continent. One is always really surprised about the personal interpretations of some officials. Obviously, it's due to lack of training. But in the end, what it really means is that it's nice to know the legislation and maybe even directives. What really counts is a lot of practical experience. One has to have a lot of cases in certain jurisdictions to really know what works and what doesn't work. And the results for you as a client, obviously, is that there is a dramatic increase in costs, because we as providers, if we would prepare something, we would know it goes through without major hassles, then our costs would also be lower. But because of this unforeseeable circumstances, unfortunately, I do think African immigration is quite costly. And this is one of the reasons why it's so costly, because there's a massive difference between the legislation and the practical applicability of the law. The next challenge is that most African countries require local employment. So for any long-term work permits or visas, you usually need to be employed by the subsidiary, branch, or by your business partner in country. Now, obviously, if you just have a relationship, a contractual relationship with your client, that's usually not what the client likes. So that is a problem, especially in smaller markets. And the only practical solution is employer of record companies, who would then offer, obviously, the local payroll, tax considerations, and also the immigration part. So keep that in mind, that the intercompany transfer concept, which is well known in South Africa, is actually not really existing in Africa. Morocco has it. They do have a similar kind of system for an ICT, but a lot of countries do not know an assignment or a temporary assignment where you can stay on the payroll and employed by the sending entity. They all require local employment. Okay, so that's really, really important to know if you plan long-term stays. The next challenge is really the slow immigration process and approvals. So look, that's not so nothing really new, but I do think it's important to mention that pre-COVID, I do think actually that South Africa and Namibia were probably among the slowest countries. Most countries actually are faster than South Africa. Namibia was also catastrophic. 4 or 5 months for a long-term work permit. Now, post-COVID, it's a complete mess. Kenya takes 3 months longer than they used to. So does Botswana, and in South Africa, nothing is really happening. It's a completely standstill. Even formally reliable semi-governmental bodies like SAQA in South Africa, South African Qualification Authority, they take now months instead of the usual 4 to 5, 6 weeks. So it's really it's a practical breakdown of the immigration system, and that's worrying, because yeah, if you want to attract foreign investment, you might want to have an immigration system which at least allows people to come within 2 or 3 months, and not currently like in South Africa 8 or 9 months, 10 months. I don't think that's practical. So the solution to this is obviously that we advise our clients that the lead time really is now 9 months instead of 6 months. So I think that's one potential way around it. But then a lot of employers can't plan 9, 10, 12 months in advance because the projects only get awarded. So there's all kinds of problems with it. I do think that the public administration needs to maybe pull up their sleeves and start working and reducing the backlogs. Okay, last, or not actually nearly the last challenge, the costs. The costs are very, very, very high in Africa. The government fees in particular, so some countries do consider, I think, immigration as a source of income instead of maybe trade promotion or foreign direct investment promotion. And instead of setting the hurdles low, they're setting them really high. You will see it there on the slide that in Egypt, DRC, in Ghana, the government fees are around $1,000 for a work permit. And then you have the really, really expensive countries, Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya, Nigeria. They charge up to $2,000 for a 2-year permit. You add another spouse and maybe 2 children, although their fees are lower, you're ending up very easily at $3,000-4,000 in government fees alone. So that's a problem. Good news is in Southern and Northern Africa, the fees are much, much lower. Yeah, and I think in general, everybody who does business on the continent, one is always amazed how expensive it actually is to do business here. And the same applies for immigration. So take that into consideration. Then another challenge is that for modern families, so unmarried, the immigration systems do not cater. So only very, very few countries accept heterosexual life partners: South Africa, Mauritius, Mozambique, Ivory Coast. And then obviously for homosexual life partners, it's really, really bleak, unfortunately, in Africa, with South Africa, Mauritius, and Mozambique being the exceptions. I do think corporates need to plan this. They need to check that with potential employees who want to go. That life partners is a challenge in most countries. And then maybe not so funny, but rather surprising anecdote, really. We have our Kenya office since a couple of years, and I'm always amazed that even when I consult, I still forget, with my liberal European upbringing, that Kenya really struggles if a husband accompanies his wife as a dependent. So if the woman is the breadwinner and has the international transfer and gets the work permit, as a man, to just accompany your wife on a dependent visa is a real challenge for Kenya. So that also has to sometimes taken into account. They do issue them, but it's a struggle. Okay, so I think that's really, really important to keep in mind. And then the last challenge is really about the immigration providers in country. I do think it's really important to understand that most of the communication these days goes through WhatsApp, not email anymore. If you ask 3 questions, then 1 gets answered, another 1 half, and the other 1 is forgotten. There's, I think, a real challenge around proactively answering and addressing problems before they actually become problems. So it's very inefficient. It often leads to what I call communication ping pong instead of, in a time efficient use of emails. It's really, really challenging. And if you have to, as a client, manage the immigration of in a few countries, and you do it directly with in-country partners, I think your hair might turn grey very quickly. And then it's a real challenge. So people who have obviously done this before, they always are quite grateful if there's a company who can maybe centralize it and then deliver service which they're used to. So I think this is important to take into consideration for companies, because it's really time consuming, and in the end it's your only HR people who then are wasting a lot of time on unnecessary stuff. Okay. So these are the challenges, really. So, and that's really the last slide for today, because I wanted to open it for quite a few questions, but let's see if there are going to be lots of questions. But so what are the solutions, really? Obviously, there's not one solution, but I think one major point I would really like to address is that, in my experience with a lot of corporates, is that immigration comes nearly at the end of their process. So they first think about our market entry, then who can go, and what products to sell and all this. And basically, when the decision is taken that somebody needs to go at X amount of months or weeks, then kind of they think, oh shit, we need a visa and we need a work permit, and that's usually way too late. So the successful companies, really, they're managing immigration at a much, much earlier stage, even before relocation, even before they send them for look and see trips, etc. So I do think immigration should be one of the first things you should think of. Now, there should be a pool of talent or candidates who could qualify to go into certain countries. In some countries, in certain professions, engineering as an example, you need SACO equivalent certificates. So these can be applied for way in advance to reduce waiting times, and especially this mad rush, because usually what happens in practice is that clients and corporates phone us and say, hey, I need these 6 people in 2 months in XYZ country, can you make it? And then we come with all our problems and all our long processing times, and then usually they fly in on business visas, which is illegal, and all kinds of problems connected to it, relating to corruption, and really increasing the risk of non-compliance. And on that point, I have to say that in South Africa, we have a very lax enforcement of our immigration rules, but other countries are much stricter. So, I mean, the fines and the penalties for companies or clients we have seen in Mozambique and Ghana, in Kenya, are quite harsh. So you really want to have an eye on the non-compliance and try to avoid that. And one way of doing it is really giving long lead times, right? So that's important. Yeah, and then the last maybe suggestion is to assign proper costs for all your admin internally, right? So it might be a good solution to outsource the immigration to a competent company, and I might know one, but I do think there is a business case for this. As a matter of fact, I know it because I hear it from our clients, but I do think still, particularly in South Africa compared to Europe and America, a lot of South African companies are still want to do a lot in-house, and they don't assign enough value internally to all the service delivered. And in the end, often it comes them cheaper if they outsource certain things. So this is it really from my side. So 20 minutes. Thank you very much for your time. And I will now unshare my screen, I believe. And then, open for questions. And back to you, Christo.
Thank you, Andreas. I am always amused that meetings are not considered work, because that is such a deep truth in most companies that going to meetings is not the same as work. So I can go to meetings, but it doesn't count as work, so I don't need a work permit. I love that personally. So for the people that have joined us, you can raise your hand to ask a meeting or type it in the chat. I'm going to start with one of Herv's questions in the chat itself. How relevant are critical skills visas today, and some of the limitations and things that we can do? Is that a loophole that we can use to fast track stuff, or is that Is that a legacy thing from the old days?
No, I do think the interesting part is South Africa is the only country in Africa which really has a critical skills list. So it's quite amazing. Like we have it, right? I mean, just a new one was published in February. And I do think it's an absolutely valuable tool. As a matter of fact, it's best practice internationally. We would be stupid not to do it. Of course, do I agree with the most recent changes towards the critical skills list? I don't mean necessarily the professions. I think the Department of Home Affairs with the Department of Higher Education followed a very thorough approach. Yeah. I think, yes, one can always complain, but I don't think the professions on the list are faulty. It's the prerogative of the legislator to include them. But what I have a problem with is obviously that they did abolish a job seeker visa, for instance, this 1 year job seeker visa, that they also don't offer a fast track for local students anymore into permanent residence when they study critical skills. So there's a couple of changes South Africa unfortunately retracted, which are not favorable. But to answer the question, I do think critical skills as a category is absolutely vital, and a lot of African countries should actually do it. I'm always amazed that they don't. Botswana, for instance, has a point system, so they actually do have it indirectly because they're awarding points for certain professions. But yeah, it's not really commonly used. I'm not quite sure why. Obviously, they might say that, look, let's face it, South Africa is probably still the most diversified economy in Africa, right? Okay. And our skill base is still, compared at least to most African countries, the broadest. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's the broadest. So one argument of these other countries might be, if we open this up, we would, have to open it up for a really, really wide range of professions. But I don't know why they're not doing it, but I think it's very useful.
So I was almost, I'd gone all the way through to a project manager in a Canadian implementation, and my application got blocked by the local union saying that there are other project and program managers available, not necessarily with the particular experience on that particular project, because it was like a copy and paste kind of thing. So that kind of made me think about, do I really have unique and scarce critical skills? And in the work I do with my clients, the recruitment bias, we want to hire people that look and sound like us, or at least have the same sort of English accent as we do if we're hiring local. Is it always truly necessary to have a expat going there? There are many other benefits, but sometimes I'm thinking, can you get the skills locally in country? And in that context, I'm pretty curious about what the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement is going to do around, we're opening up business across Africa, but I want my guy on site for 12 to 18 months to train the local people in the way we do things, processes, operations, procedures and things, and then he comes back. There is someone there who can do the job, but I want my guy to teach them how we do it. I'm wondering how that sort of critical skills environment, easier to migrate, may evolve under Africa Free Trade.
I think it will take a long, long time, because if you look even at the European Union, which has the freedom of movement since about 25 years, 30 years, I don't even know in which treaty they did it. But even they still require local work permits, right? So yes. I mean, at least local registration. So it's not that the local government doesn't want to know who's here, but obviously, and in terms of Africa, I think the differences between the economies are still so vast that the freedom of movement, I think, will be one of the very last steps they might implement, in my opinion. The pull factor of South Africa or Kenya, or maybe even Senegal and Ghana and Morocco is too large for the neighboring countries to enact a real liberal freedom of movement. I don't think so.
Yeah, fair enough. I think the data point that's interesting for me, before I go off my interesting points for me, is that maybe we are used to having a large and skilled pool of people available. One of the interesting things I learned 2 weeks ago is that we are seeing the Great Resignation happening in South Africa, which I thought, that's weird. We have such massive unemployment rates. Why would people leave perfectly good jobs that gives you security at least until the end of your notice period? But this happens in the skilled sectors. It's IT, it's data scientists, it's financial expertise, it's audit accounting stuff. So, okay, I'm very curious about what the long-term evolution is, and we're going to have a couple of conversations, hopefully, about that. I think one of the questions that we're seeing in the chat is what is the definition of work in the African immigration context? If meetings and training and and actually I want to add on to that question, what is the context of work for one of my clients is running a subsidiary in Mozambique. So he flies out regularly to work with the Mozambican team, have meetings, and that I assume is training them how to do stuff, meeting with clients, moving projects forward, etc. So what is that, the strict definition and the we can get away with it if we don't get caught definition?
Okay, so obviously I can't speak for all 54 countries or 52, but I can give you the principles. So in South Africa, as well as in general, the work is always defined as activities which are in your usual line of business. And I always use the same example. So if you're a UK-based lawyer or barrister who is a specialist in labor laws and flies to South Africa for 2 weeks and negotiates on behalf of his corporate client with the trade unions here, this person is not doing business meetings. This person is working, right?
Yes.
So he needs a short-term work permit. There is no question about this. It's not business meetings.
Yes.
Okay. So while now your example for your client, if you fly regularly from Cape Town or from Johannesburg into Maputo and train your local branch people in Mozambique, you might say, well, that's probably business meetings. And you're probably going to get away with it until somebody probably complains. And then the authorities say, oh, you were here once a month for a week.
Yep.
What are you training the whole time? No, you're actually working here, right? So that's where the problem comes in.
Yes.
But where definitely work is always applicable is if you are on client side. So if you are now sitting at your client to do some work, then usually the threshold is always crossed from business meetings into work. Okay, so third-party sites is always work, except for Zambia. And the meetings is a bit grayish. And then I usually say, look at the duration. How likely is it that you spend a month somewhere to have business meetings? Please. I mean, you know, it's not realistic. Anyway, I think that answers that question.
To a degree, I would argue with that particular example, even if he goes in for 2 or 3 days to do his monthly management meetings, it is technically meetings, but his job is to exercise oversight and control, and that's what the management meeting does. So, okay.
But to apply for a work visa in Mozambique takes so long that I understand that part, right? But you want to kind of strike a balance, and I think that balance is definitely third-party site is definitely out of bounds. But I think there's another 1 or 2 other good questions I saw in between.
Yeah, definitely. I think another question from in the chat, as a mobility or HR manager who is onboarding African assignees for international firms, what are the pieces of advice you can offer me? So when I'm onboarding staff, so presumably I've done all of the immigration and stuff, they are now here where I need them to be or in the country where I need them to be. What do I do with them to get them up and running?
I'm not sure if that's a question for me as an immigration provider, because obviously you need to make sure that they're legally in the country, that they have the work permit for your company, so they're compliant. What you then do them from a training point perspective obviously depends, what you want to do with them. If the question is aimed at, can I send them then to another branch? Well, that depends then really again on the setup of the companies. Is there a local subsidiary? Is there not, etc. So I think it's very difficult for me to answer that question.
As I can add my personal perspective to that. So in my previous career, we moved 17 times. We worked in 5 cities in 4 countries. So we'd gone through the recipient side of this a couple of times. And what was incredibly powerful for us is that the on-ground service provider, we had this full service package. We're not only helping you with your visas and taking you to the local
relocation
to get that, we also help you find a house. And typically as part of that conversations, maybe just because we've done it so often, as we're going around looking at houses or going to the meeting, whatever it is that we're doing, just saying, hey, where do we buy groceries? How does schools work? How does transport work? And having that local content around, okay, so you're in a nice suburb and here's how it works, but don't walk late at night. Having the agent who's helping me with the legal processes, bring her local content in was incredibly helpful for me. I don't know if that was just part of the service offering and I was too dumb at the time to notice that. But that for me is part of the answer is if you are working with someone that's helping you transition people, especially if the spouse is coming with, spend time.
Yeah, I know the spouses are important. I know. It's the international assignments always, they usually get dunked by the spouses or not. I mean, it's important to make the spouses really part of the process because the main applicant goes to work and is gone for 8 or 10 hours. So it's really important.
Yeah,
anyway, another question.
Actually, in the expat positions, 14 or 16 hours. So the spouse has got and in one case it was the husband who's got the school moms group. Yeah, that's helping. Building on that spouse question, if as an assignee I am taking my spouse over with me, what are some of the considerations when applying for the spouse or the child to accompany?
Can you just repeat that, because the line is quite bad, at least on my side. I don't know if it's me or your side.
Apologies for that. So the question saying, building on the spouse question, as an assignee, if I am taking my spouse with me, what are some of the important considerations when I am applying for a spouse or child or children to accompany me?
Okay, so I think what you want to really check is obviously, look, again, I'm answering from the immigration perspective. Usually they fly in, do the relocation and look and see trip and look for schools, etc. But I think from an immigration perspective, the usual question is always to check really the validity of the passports, because the visas will only be issued for the validity of the passport. So that's number one. Then normally health insurance is often a requirement, especially for study visas or student permits or something. Yeah. So do you have an international medical insurance? Is it allowed in the country of destination? And then really, how does it work with the student visas, right? So do they already accepted by the school? Has the school issued an acceptance letter, and that can be used to apply for the student visa? And then I think the last important consideration is, can we apply while the family is still in the home country, or do we have time for that? Yeah. Or they're already flying in and we need to change the status locally? That usually adds stress. My preferred approach is really to apply before and ideally have at least the results ready for collection, and then they fly in, and then everybody can relax, because usually this move is so stressful for them already that you don't need an additional factor which stresses people, right? So you want to take care of that immigration before.
Yeah, I think from our experience and looking at the entry barriers around cost and time and local content and local jobs and all of that, that's probably something you only do if this is a strategic long-term immigration thing. And I'm thinking 2 to 3 years at least for the person to be there. If he's going to be over there 6 months or 9 months or something to get something up and running, it's probably cheaper for you as the company to pay for him to come home every second week. Now that it's easier to fly with COVID, or come home once a month, than take the entire family through the disruption. So how long are they going to be there? And it's going to take me 9 months to get him there. He needs to be there for a while. These are probably more strategic kind of conversations than just, shit, I need an engineer. I know a local guy. I'm going to push him over and take his family with. You really have to be intentional and thoughtful as a company to do this, because it's expensive, it takes time, it's disruptive, etc. A more technical question maybe, what is the difference between a South African investor visa and a SA business visa?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So strictly speaking, none. The funny thing is, when you and me talk about business visa, we usually refer to a business trip, right? A short-term business trip, okay? Now, our Immigration Act, Section 15, which used to be business permits, which is for entrepreneurs, investors who buy businesses or set up their own businesses, now is called a business visa. So that's why the question is very good. So in terms of the Immigration Act, the business visa is actually the investor or entrepreneur visa, if you want to call it that way, and not the business travel.
Okay, so in South Africa, we theoretically have 3 ways of getting someone in. He's an investor visa, business visa, here to set up and run the business. There's a business travel visa, so meetings and training, and there is a work residence permit kind of visa system?
So South Africa has so short term you can come on business visas on business trips just with a tourist visa for business purposes, but it's a tourist visa. Then you have a short term work visa for 90 days, as I mentioned, and then you have 3 different categories of work permits, which are temporary residence permits for up to 5 years, which is the critical skills, the intercompany transfer, and the general work visa. And then we have the business visa, investor visa for the investors and entrepreneurs, and then obviously there's other visas like study visas, volunteer visas, etc. So our Immigration Act and legislation is actually quite detailed and offers a lot of options compared to a lot of other African countries. Our problem is, like in other areas, not policies and legislation. Our problem is implementation.
Yeah, the execution.
Yeah.
Let me just check for the chat if anybody wants to raise a hand and ask the question, please do so. So we spoke about the SAQA, the problem of getting your equivalent certificates, presumably everything out.
I think Hervé has a question. At least he raised his hand.
Oh, okay. Hervé, do you want to sort of unmute and ask?
Yes, perfect. I heard you talking a lot about Kenya. I just wanted to know if it's allowed for people to work on a business permit in Kenya. Is that, maybe you can just give us some light on that.
So Kenya doesn't have a business permit per se, but so if you go there for business meetings, you do this on a normal visa, okay, a normal business visa. If you want to work there, they have a special pass, which is their short-term work permit for 90 days. So that's the typical, you go there for a month and you work either at client or in your own branch, but you do work and you don't have just meetings. That's special pass, it's called, the short term. And then they have usually they have a couple of classes for work permits, but the majority of people in companies is a Class D work permit, which is issued for up to 2 years, and that's then the work permit.
Okay, I've got no other questions, I think, from my side. Any comments or remarks from your side?
No, thank you very much for the opportunity. And if there's no other questions, then I think we should stop it so people don't have to look at a recording, which is too long. So
yeah, there's 2 things I want to close out. 3 things I think from my side then. The first is just reinforcing, when I worked in Botswana on a project, we used a service provider to help with the visa processes. My colleague refused to do it. He spent hours sitting in queues, and it took him 6 months, and I spent 6 weeks, and I spent an hour driving to Gaborone, 15 minutes in the office, and an hour driving back. As a company, if you're thinking about, wow, this is a lot of money, you have to trade off the hidden cost of lost production and frustration and the risk of being in trouble with the authorities against the cost, because the lost production is not on your income statement. The cost of paying Andreas to do this is, do not get confused. It is always better to have professionals that understand the local thing to do it. It's faster, it's better, and it's right. So that's the first plug. Just if you're thinking about this, use someone to manage the process. Second plug, for those that are listening to the recordings and things, this is what we do as SAIN, as Hervé said. We help our members to get projects up and running, and we connect them to the most appropriate service providers. People like Andreas, funders, investors, whoever you need to make the thing work in that particular country. So that's what we do. Use us, use our members to make your life better and effective and efficient. Andreas, from my side, thank you very, very much for spending almost 50 minutes with us this morning, for giving up your time to come and talk to us, for preparing, for sharing all of your insights. I have absolutely enjoyed the conversation, maybe because I have been on the receiving end of that process so many times. Yeah. Thank you very much. Have a fabulous travel trip to Spain, and I hope that we can have another chat pretty soon. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah,
Thank you.
really appreciate it.